The nation's long web of interstates provided the perfect hunting ground for a depraved predator. He preyed on hitchhikers wandering the roads. He held them captive, then tortured and raped them. When that didn't satisfy his warped cravings, he killed instead.
Across the nation, a serial rapist targeted unsuspecting women. It was only a matter of time till his dark urges raged out of control and led him to murder. He followed a path so random, it was impossible to trace, and all that tied him to his crimes were his access to the highways and a bizarre sexual fetish. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When investigators believed the suspect had committed dozens of murders, the FBI was determined to put the brakes on his nationwide rampage.
February 5th, 1990. On a road in Houston, Texas, 18-year-old Nicole Tuttle desperately tried to flag down passing motorists. Someone finally stopped for the bruised and bleeding woman.
Oh my God.
The driver took her to the closest phone to call police. At the Houston police station, Nicole told officers that she'd been kidnapped and assaulted, but she'd managed to escape. Her ordeal began in California 1 week earlier. On January 29th, she hitched a ride from a trucker at a rest stop. He said his name was Dusty and that he was headed east through Arizona. After a few hours on the road, she fell asleep in the back compartment of his truck. It seemed that was exactly what he was waiting for. He climbed in back and overpowered her. Before she was fully awake, he chained her to the walls and gagged her with a horse bit. The trucker whipped her and pierced her with pins and fishhooks. He also raped and sodomized her. Nicole told police that she was chained inside the cab for 6 days. Her ordeal didn't end there. Inside his Houston apartment, the trucker allowed her to bathe, then chained her to the bed and raped her again. She watched helplessly as he approached her with a straight razor. He pressed the blade close to her scalp and began to slice off her hair. After 3 hours, he forced her back into the truck. This time, he failed to bind her. When they stopped at a brewery, he left her alone as he walked inside to sign for his new freight.
Do you know how many days that you were in the truck?
Nicole knew this might be her only chance.
Where did you...
She ran for it, still wearing a dog leash around her neck.
I needed to go to California.
Houston police stopped a trucker in the area whose rig fit Nicole's description.
And it...
She said he was not the man who attacked her. A background check revealed no outstanding warrants or convictions, so police released the trucker. Nicole told the officers to stop searching. She was too frightened to testify against her attacker. She just wanted to go home to California. On February 5th, the same day that Nicole escaped, another young woman was on the highway thumbing for rides. Just 15 miles away in Pasadena, Texas, 14-year-old Regina K. Walters was running away with her new boyfriend. Her parents were divorced, and Regina usually stayed with her father in Houston. She'd been visiting her mother for a few days when she fled and began hitchhiking. Whether she was following the lead of her new teenage boyfriend or just testing her independence, a trucker soon stopped for the pretty young girl. Regina's mother, Carolyn Walters, was a single mom who worked long hours as a department store clerk. When she came home from work, she was surprised to find her daughter was not home.
Regina?
Her daughter did not answer.
Regina?
Carolyn found no notes and saw no other signs that her daughter had been back to the house. She checked the answering machine, but Regina had left no messages. Carolyn called her daughter's friends and Regina's father in Houston.
Hello, Chris.
No one had heard from the girl.
Is Regina there?
The distraught mother reported her daughter as a missing person to Pasadena, Texas police.
I'm Detective Jackson. How are you?
She spoke with a detective from the juvenile section, providing the officer with Regina's description. Her 14-year-old daughter was about 5 feet tall, weighed 95 pounds, and had long, curly brown hair. The detective asked Carolyn what steps she had taken so far to find her.
Has anyone heard from her?
Carolyn had posted missing persons flyers, but no one had yet
Done this
responded.
before?
The worried mother hadn't heard from her daughter since they argued 2
Form,
nights
and we
before.
will try to see what we can do.
At 9:30 that night, Regina told her mother she was going to visit a friend.
I just think you ought to stay home tonight.
When Carolyn objected, the girl insisted she would be right back.
Regina, what?
Against her better judgment, Carolyn relented, trusting that Regina would call if she stayed out later.
But you can go ahead.
Though the young teen had a history of running away, she always returned on her own.
Anybody about her parents or where she is right now?
Her mother believed this time was different.
Does she have a boyfriend?
Pasadena, Texas Police Detective Suzanne Jackson of the Juvenile Division was assigned the case. She understood Carolyn's concern.
Several days passed, and Regina would normally call her mom when she would leave home and let her mother know that she was okay and that she was just out. She would be back when she was ready to come home, and she had not done that.
You can just set those up right here.
Carolyn posted more flyers at the convenience store close to her house. She held out hope that her daughter was unharmed. Maybe she was simply staying with a friend. Along with Regina's photo and description, Carolyn offered a reward for information on her daughter's whereabouts. "5 days after Regina's disappearance, Carolyn received a phone call.
You know someone who's been with my daughter?
The caller had seen Regina talking to 2 young men on the evening she left her mother's house.
Okay.
The person only knew the men as Billy and Ricky,
Bye-bye now.
but she remembered that Billy had a girlfriend with the peculiar name of Urena. Carolyn immediately called
May I
police.
speak to Detective Jackson, please?
The following day, a second caller gave Carolyn the address of an apartment where he had seen Regina at a party 2 days before.
Here it is. Doesn't sound
When
like
police
you-
arrived, no one answered.
Okay.
The manager told them the apartment was rented to a man named Billy Wayne Gibbs. The next morning, the detective told her colleagues about the case. She mentioned she was looking for Gibbs in connection with Regina's disappearance. She was also looking for 2 others, a woman named Urena and a man named Ricky. She didn't know their last names. To her surprise, the officers did. Billy Wayne Gibbs had a girlfriend named Urena Sweet and a friend named Ricky Lee Jones. The 3 were wanted in connection with an auto theft. Units were dispatched to Gibbs' apartment to wait for his return. Officers patrolled the nearby road. After several hours of surveillance, they picked up 17-year-old Gibbs and his girlfriend Urena near his apartment. Police handcuffed the young couple and brought them to the station for questioning. The third suspect, Ricky Lee Jones, was still at large. The arresting officer asked Gibbs if he had seen Regina or Ricky Lee Jones. Gibbs said he had spoken to them 4 days ago, but not since. He told police that Ricky and Regina were in love and planned to run away to Mexico, where Ricky had relatives. The detectives suspected that 18-year-old Jones had another reason for leaving town. If he were caught with Regina, he could be charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor.
Regina was 14, and they obviously were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. When they saw the flyers that the mother had left out with a reward on her location, they decided it would be best to leave the area so they wouldn't be caught. And that's when they decided to leave the area, hitchhike to Mexico.
The detective learned that Ricky Lee Jones was already on probation for theft. Fleeing jurisdiction was a parole violation. She issued a warrant for his arrest. She also fed Regina's description into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, a database listing both victims and criminals nationwide. If Regina were located by any police department in the country, Pasadena, Texas police would be notified. Until then, with no known address or vehicle, it would be difficult to find the pair. 15 miles away, Houston police interviewed Jerry Walters, Regina's divorced father. He told them he had received a disturbing call on his unlisted home number on the evening of March 17th. The conversation was brief, and Walters did not recognize the caller's voice. The man asked, "Are you Regina's father?" When Walters replied yes, the man told him he knew where to find Regina. He said she was in a loft of a barn, and that there had been some changes. He had cut the girl's hair. Regina's father asked if she was dead or alive. The caller hung up without answering. Detective Jackson asked Southwestern Bell to trace the call. The company told her it would take several days. Police would simply have to wait. Aside from the phone records, the trail of the missing 14-year-old and her boyfriend was stone cold. In March of 1990, Pasadena, Texas police detective Suzanne Jackson continued her search for 14-year-old Regina K. Walters. The girl hadn't been seen since early February, when she left a friend's house with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones. The detective's only lead was an anonymous phone call made to Regina's father on March 17th. The call had yet to be traced. On the same night Regina's father received his call in Houston, her mother in Pasadena, Texas, also got a call.
Hello?
She recorded the conversation as police had advised.
Yeah.
An unknown man told Carolyn to meet him at 6:30 the next morning at the local convenience store. He had something to tell her about Regina, and he wanted to say it in person. Without giving his name or description, he hung up. Carolyn called Detective Jackson, who told her it was risky to meet the man. When Carolyn insisted, Jackson said police would go with her for protection. From a distance, officers kept an eye on Carolyn as she waited at the convenience store for the unknown caller. She had no way of knowing if the man knew who she was, and no way to identify him. Her only hope was if he would approach her. She studied everyone who came in and out, and everyone who used the phone. Carolyn waited over 2 hours. The caller never came forward. 2 days later, Pasadena, Texas police received the phone records for both calls to Regina's parents. They learned that the call to Regina's father in Houston was made from a gas station in Menace, Texas, 200 miles northwest of where she was last seen. The call to her mother's home in Pasadena, Texas, was made from a payphone only a few blocks away.
At that particular time, it was obvious that we were becoming very concerned about Regina's whereabouts. With the phone calls and the information that we received, we were pretty sure that there was going to be foul play involved.
2 weeks later, Carolyn told Detective Jackson that the man who had called her before wanted to set up another meeting at the same convenience store. Police traced the call to a nearby payphone. The caller had already fled. On April 23rd, police found a partial skeleton of a small female near a riverbank in Pasadena, Texas. They determined the young girl's age and weight was close to Regina's. Detective Suzanne Jackson brought Regina's dental records to the medical examiner.
I went to the ME's office with my information. We did a comparison on some dental x-rays and found that this particular person was not Regina.
Months went by with no leads. Regina's parents feared the worst. On October 12th, 2 boys were playing near a dirt road in Manville, Texas, 26 miles south of Houston. Close to the road, they came across a wood pile. They found something they'd never forget: human remains. They ran home to tell their parents, who called police. Officers arrived and secured the area. They could not identify the body at the site. It was too badly decomposed, and there was no wallet or identification nearby. All police could guess was that the victim was a child or young adult. They hoped an autopsy would tell them more. The Pasadena, Texas detective traveled to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office, bringing Regina's dental records.
So you almost have a match right
The
there.
ME compared those records to x-rays taken of the corpse.
But then you get everything you can obviously.
They did not match.
It was a little disappointing, although we were very relieved that it was not Regina. Her parents at this particular point were concerned that we were going to be recovering a body and we were not going to be locating Regina alive, and they were ready for some type of closure at this point.
As the search continued in Texas through the fall of 1990, a farmer prepared to burn down his old barn in Bond County, Illinois. He hadn't been inside in years. The farmer climbed up into the hayloft to make one last check of the place. He looked through the abandoned building, but found only items long since discarded. Nothing seemed especially unusual or out of place. Then, something caught his eye. He looked closer at the strewn hay and saw a skeleton that appeared to be human. The farmer immediately called police. In October of 1990, as Detective Jackson hunted in Texas for 14-year-old Regina K. Walters, a decayed body was found in the hayloft of an abandoned barn in Bond County, Illinois. Agent Mike Sheely of the Illinois State Police responded to the scene.
I had received a call from the local sheriff's office in Bond County, Illinois, and they had instructed me that they had found a body in a rural setting near the Interstate 70, which is a major interstate that travels through Bond County.
Crime scene technicians conducted a thorough search of the barn. No clothes were found on or near the body. There was no wallet or other ID. They did find a single white thread close to the bones that seemed too new to have been in the old barn for long. Police photographed the remains from various angles. They found baling wire that matched the wire wrapped around the corpse's neck. Some hair remained on the head. Because the skull was so small, police believed the victim was probably a child. The people of nearby Greenville had not seen a murder in 10 years. The anonymity of this crime was especially disturbing. Police had no way of knowing if the victim was from the area or just dumped there by someone passing through on nearby Interstate 70. At first, they weren't even sure of the corpse's age or sex. Forensic anthropologist Mark Johnsey was called in to conduct an examination. He made several discoveries that helped Illinois State Agent Mike Shealy begin to identify the victim.
Mark was able to determine that it was a young female between the ages of 14 to 16, her approximate weight, which was 90 to 110 pounds. There was indication that her hair had been cut. The distal ends had begun to grow again, but the forensics had told us that it was recent.
The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The killer had almost severed the victim's head by twisting baling wire around her neck 16 times.
That's what we found.
From the condition of the joints and vertebrae, Johnsey discerned that the girl was killed almost a year before. A forensic scientist analyzed the white fiber found close to the body. Maybe it would yield a clue to what the young girl or her murderer had been wearing. He determined the fiber was mostly cotton, but it didn't come from clothing. It likely came from a towel. Searching the National Crime Database, State Agent Mike Shealy listed the Illinois Jane Doe as a white female, 14 to 16 years of age, probably killed as early as September 1989.
We were alarmed to find that there was 950 matches with the age group and the category and the time frame, which made the task very difficult to begin the identification process.
He narrowed the field to about 100 by specifying the victim's time of death closer to the spring of 1990. The investigator then sent teletypes to law enforcement agencies working those cases. The detective investigating the disappearance of Regina Walters in Pasadena, Texas, received the teletype on October 16th. She believed the body's description fit Regina's and phoned the Bond County Sheriff's Office in Illinois. The receptionist told her they had gotten so many responses that the sheriff would have to call her back. Before she hung up, the detective remembered the mysterious phone call Regina's father had received. The caller had said the girl was in a barn.
When I asked her if the body was found in a barn, she immediately transferred me to the sheriff, in which I started talking to him right away. And it was immediately discovered that it was possibly Regina, and so we immediately jumped on that and started sending the teletypes back and forth.
The detective asked another question based on the March 17th phone call to Regina's father. Did the girl in the barn have shorn hair? The Illinois authorities confirmed that she did. The girl found in Illinois matched the caller's description of Regina.
We sent a copy of dental x-rays to Greenville, Illinois, to the sheriff's office, and those dental x-rays were matched with the body that was discovered there, and it was confirmed to be Regina's body.
One question remained. Where was Regina's boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones? Detectives called on the FBI for help. Special Agent Mark Young, a behavioral expert in the Houston field office, was assigned as case agent.
And I tried to go in and contact every person that had any involvement with Ricky or Regina. I wanted to see if there was anything that they mentioned that would have proven valuable to locating Ricky.
At his former high school, Pasadena, Texas detectives also continued to pursue Ricky Lee Jones.
That's right, you did. What do you call it? Just a second, please.
A guidance counselor said that Jones had not been enrolled in school for the past year.
He was in school last round. Okay, do you have any information I need?
She had little other information about him, though she did provide his last known address.
Pretty old.
It was the home of Jones's family. His sister Tammy was the only one there. She said that no one in the family had seen Ricky for over a year.
A year? You haven't seen him in a year?
They had written him off as a bad kid, believing he'd end up in prison.
A year? Yeah, and
The detective asked if they had relatives in Mexico.
I guess they figured he was in jail or
Tammy said her mother had some in Matamoros, just south of the Texas border.
Have you seen her?
Jackson showed her a photo of Regina, but Tammy didn't recognize her.
Okay, that's the last time. Has he left?
Ricky was already listed as wanted because he had violated his probation. So we felt like maybe he was afraid to come home if he did know anything about Regina's disappearance and her death. We were in fear that he may not want to call and tell us what had happened or may be involved himself.
As Special Agent Mark Young pored over the details of the case, he developed a profile of Regina's killer. The agent determined that 18-year-old Ricky Lee Jones probably did not commit the crime.
If Ricky Lee Jones had murdered Regina, he would have done it in a fit of anger, and that would have been reflected in the crime scene, and you didn't see that. It was a very controlled, purposeful crime scene. You got the impression that this is an older person, a white male, a traveler, truck driver, traveling salesman, somebody that had a reason to be across the country.
The fact that the barn was close to an interstate supported Agent Young's theory. The crime scene told the agent more about the sadistic murderer. He had stripped off Regina's clothing, killed her slowly by strangulation, and most notably, had cut Regina's long hair.
Whoever did this crime was doing things beyond what was necessary to perpetrate the crime. Maybe a sexual predator or sexual sadist, a person that had other offenses also.
Investigators were alerted to another crime in the town of Marshall, Texas, 200 miles north of Houston. Partial skeletal remains of a young man were found, washed up on a creek bank. The skull had been perforated on the left side by a small caliber firearm. Though there was little evidence to positively identify the body, the victim's age and location led police to conclude it was probably Ricky Lee Jones.
I came to the conclusion that there were no other leads to cover in this case. For all intents and purposes, the case was closed in our division. We had nowhere else to go.
To investigators, it looked like the man who had killed Regina K. Walters and her boyfriend had gotten away with murder. As the hunt for a sadistic killer ground to a halt in Pasadena, Texas, 1,000 miles west in Arizona, authorities encountered a problem on their own highways. An Arizona highway patrolman was at the end of his shift when he came across a tractor-trailer parked on the side of an interstate on-ramp. The rig had to be moved. It was a hazard to passing motorists. He noticed the lights were on and the engine was still running. As he approached the driver's door, Officer Michael Miller recalled that a man suddenly burst out of the cab and immediately spread his arms against the truck.
And I asked him, I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Nothing, officer, we're doing just fine." He said, "There's no problem. I've got a gun in my back pocket." And he motioned to his back pocket and then put his hands up on the side of his truck. This was kind of an unusual situation. And I could still hear the woman screaming on the inside of the truck.
Miller cuffed Robert Ben Rhodes and escorted the trucker back to his car to question him further.
He said it was just fine. They were there together in a, I guess you would call it, consenting situation. And, but I didn't know if the screams coming from the woman were the fact that she was startled, she was surprised, but I was going to find out what the situation was.
With Rhodes's hands cuffed behind his back, Miller seatbelted him into the patrol car. The officer returned to the truck to check on the frantic woman. He found her handcuffed to the walls by her wrists and ankles. The patrolman assured her she was no longer in danger.
I told her, "Ma'am, you're going to need to remain here until I can get some help out here, because this is a criminal or a crime scene, and some detectives are going to have to look at this." I said, "Just remain calm. This man is not going to be back to bother you again. Just remain calm." I left the truck and moved back to my patrol car.
Miller returned just in time. Rhodes had maneuvered his cuffed hands in front of him and released his seatbelt. He was about to open the car door. The officer quickly recuffed him.
There is no actual routine stop out there in the road that no matter what you come across out there, you never know who you're dealing with. And it kind of sent a chill up my spine to know that if this man, as cool as he was, could have probably killed me and the girl at the same time and still been on the road.
Police from the town of Casa Grande arrived on the scene. They freed the woman and transported her and Rhodes to the police station for further questioning. Inside the truck, they found a gruesome array of torture tools. Chains that attached to rings welded to the back of the sleeper compartment, fishhooks, bloody towels, a horse bit, and a briefcase filled with the implements of a sexual sadist. They also found a camera in the briefcase, along with several hairs that did not belong to the woman found in the truck. Casa Grande Police Detective Rick Barnhart led the investigation.
Robert Rhodes had what I refer to as a rape kit in his truck. He had all kinds of paraphernalia. He had long sticks with clips on the end where he would draw and quarter his victims. He had whips. And just based on that, I knew Robert Rhodes was a predator.
Just north of Phoenix at the truck stop.
The woman found chained in Rhodes's truck was 27-year-old Kathleen Vine.
I've never had any problems before.
She told the detective she had been picked up about an hour earlier from the Rip Griffin's truck stop north of Phoenix.
He was trying to rape.
When she dozed off in the sleeper compartment, the trucker climbed back, assaulted her, and chained her to the walls. The man told her his name was Whips and Chains, and that he'd been doing this for 15 years. Police photographed her injuries, wrist burns from the handcuffs, and welts from the beatings. She tried to fight off her attacker, but her hands were chained. All she could do to defend herself was to bite him. She managed to injure his left shoulder enough to distract him from raping her. Kathleen agreed to press assault and kidnapping charges, but Detective Barnhart believed she might be problematic for the prosecution.
My interview with Kathleen was really sort of bizarre. She would talk about this reality, this terrible assault that she endured, and then periodically she would revert back to a story about her traveling across the country to see the president. She told me she wanted to give the president a microchip, and she talked about the underground prison where no one escapes from. And all this time my heart was sinking because I needed Kathleen to tell a very lucid story about the horrible incident that happened to her.
The detective asked trucker Robert Ben Rhodes for his version of events. Rhodes said Kathleen was crazy and described her as a lot lizard, the trucker's term for a woman who trades sex for rides. He claimed that she solicited him and that she liked it rough, though they never actually had sex. He refused to provide any details about what happened in the truck's sleeper compartment. He talked around the subject, never admitting to any crime.
Can you please remove your...
Police photographed Rhodes's wound. It looked like a bite mark on his left shoulder, just as Kathleen had described. Rhodes claimed he sustained the injury while loading his truck, but Detective Barnhart believed Kathleen's story.
She told me she tried to bite his throat, but he moved and she bit him on the left upper shoulder. And we've got a photo of her bite mark, and her story completely corroborated, what happened in that sleeper cab.
Local prosecutors arrested Robert Ben Rhodes and held him for aggravated assault, sexual assault, and unlawful imprisonment. But their only witness, Kathleen Vine, suffered from paranoid delusions. To keep him behind bars, they needed additional witnesses. Kathleen's claim that Rhodes had been kidnapping women for 15 years haunted Detective Barnhart. He entered Rhodes's name into the NCIC in case other agencies had reported similar crimes. As the detective pursued the case, it made headlines across the Southwest. A Houston police officer was among those who read about it. The trucker detained in Arizona sounded like the same man who was stopped outside of Houston earlier in the year. Police suspected Rhodes had held a woman captive in his truck for 6 days, raping and torturing her until she finally escaped. They were unable to press charges since the woman failed to identify him. Houston Police Sergeant Bomar described the case to Detective Barnhart.
I was contacted by Sergeant Bomar. His was the case where the young lady escaped. I was fairly positive that Robert Rhodes was at least a serial rapist. I had suspicions that he might be a murderer.
Since Rhodes had crossed state lines since his last crime, Detective Barnhart contacted the FBI to request assistance. He hoped that with the FBI's support, he could gather enough evidence of the trucker's serial sex crimes to build a case that would stick. Special Agent Bob Lee of the Houston FBI field office knew the place to start was in Rhodes's Houston apartment. He spoke to Rhodes's landlord. She had checked the apartment after the trucker's arrest and was horrified to find bloodied torture devices. Based on her statement, Agent Lee secured a warrant to search the premises.
We know that serial rapists often keep souvenirs from their victims, whether it be a piece of clothing or a piece of jewelry or whatever. When we went in, we found bondage paraphernalia, we found chains, we found handcuffs, we found a rack that someone could be tied to. We found a lot of women's jewelry.
Agents and Houston police also found bloody white towels, women's clothing, and stacks of photographs. The snapshots depicted some women with shorn hair in various states of undress, bound and bruised. Investigators believe that Rhodes shot the photos as souvenirs of his crimes to relive his victims' terror. Though agents now had evidence that Rhodes was likely a serial rapist, they were unable to identify any of his victims from the photos. With no additional witnesses, the case in Arizona was still weak. Prosecutors' only witness, Kathleen Vine, was questionable. A trial would be a contest of he said, she said, and a mentally disturbed woman might leave jurors unconvinced. By December 1990, the best Arizona prosecutors could do was to offer Rhodes a deal. 6 years, including time served and work release eligibility, if he pled guilty to the charges against Vine. His attorney accepted. In about a year, Rhodes could be out on parole, stalking new prey. By October 1991, a year after 14-year-old Regina K. Walters was found murdered in Illinois, her case remained unsolved. Special Agent Mark Young, an FBI profiler, predicted the murderer was probably a trucker or traveling salesman with prior sexual offenses. His signature behavior was to hack off his victim's hair. Agent Young spoke to area law enforcement agencies hoping they had open cases that might match the profile.
One day, Bob Lee, who was an agent in the FBI on the Violent Crime Squad, overheard me talking on the phone to a police officer. And he said, hey, I had a case I had worked a few months back where a truck driver kidnapped a young girl and her head hair was cut just like you're saying.
The victim's name was Nicole Tuttle. She had also been raped repeatedly and had escaped the day Regina Walters and Ricky Lee Jones were last seen alive, on Monday, February 5th, 1990. That same day, Houston police had stopped a trucker named Robert Ben Rhodes, who fit Nicole's description of her attacker. At the time, she told the officers it was the wrong man. Special Agent Bob Lee from the FBI's Houston field office recalled that Nicole later changed her story in the hospital where she was treated for her wounds.
Later that night, she told the detectives that Robert Ben Rhodes was in fact the individual that had kidnapped her. When asked if she wanted to press charges, she told the police officer that all she wanted to do was go home.
Lee also told Agent Young that Nicole was not the trucker's only victim. Rhodes was serving time in an Arizona prison for the assault of Kathleen Vine and was eligible for work release in just 3 months. The agent then described the search of the trucker's residence.
And he said, we found some photographs in his apartment, some of his own pictures, with somebody else with short hair, who it seems like she was at a barn.
The chilling photos portrayed a young girl at different locations, wearing a variety of seductive outfits. At the barn, she was in a black dress, shielding herself from Rhodes's camera.
When I saw those photos, I said, this is Regina Walters. In order to verify that, I went to the family and I got several of their pictures, and there are facial characteristics and markings that exactly duplicated the pictures Rhodes took.
The FBI began to build a kidnapping and murder case against Robert Ben Rhodes. They revisited the evidence from the search of Rhodes's apartment and found more photos of Regina. They also found several articles of women's clothing, including a black dress, which lab examiners confirmed was the dress Regina had worn in the photos. Illinois State Agent Mike Sheely was notified. He forwarded the evidence found in the Greenville barn to the FBI lab in Houston. Lab examiners discovered that the cotton fiber recovered in Illinois was consistent with the bloody towels found in Rhodes's Houston apartment, but the results were inconclusive since that type of towel was so common. Detective Jackson from Pasadena, Texas, met with agents Sheely, Young, and Lee at the Houston FBI field office to discuss what they needed for a solid indictment against Rhodes, not only for Regina's murder, but for crimes against his other nameless victims. With Rhodes nearing his release date, Illinois State Agent Mike Sheely knew they were racing against the clock.
He was eligible for parole, and that he was actually eligible to work outside the prison almost on a release system. And so we were under pressure to have the indictments and to get him arrested on our charges.
You have a seat here.
Agents interviewed Rhodes's former Houston employer, Mike Eggleton. The trucking firm owner was not surprised to see him. Eggleton had been questioned by authorities about Rhodes before. A few years back, local police suspected the trucker of assaulting a woman in the back of his rig, but no formal charges were ever filed. The truck Rhodes had driven had been sold, but Eggleton provided its vehicle identification number, as well as Rhodes's trucking logs and fuel receipts. While agents waited for a trace to come back on the truck's ID number, the team began to assemble a timeline of the trucker's travels. Agents found fuel receipts from a gas station in Ennis, Texas, dated March 17, 1990, the same place and date as the call made to Regina's father, Jerry Walters.
Oklahoma City.
Several of the local calls to Regina's mother, Carolyn, also coincided with Rhodes's time in Houston. One question about the calls remained. The killer could easily have gotten Carolyn's number from missing persons flyers posted around town. But how had he gotten Jerry Walters' unlisted home number? Agent Young found the answer in evidence stored in Arizona.
It was in that evidence that we located Regina Walters' little spiral notebook. And the front cover was all of her personal information, her mother's address and phone number, and her father's.
When Young flipped the notebook over, he found something even more disturbing. A message that he believed was written by Rhodes himself. A knife and gun were drawn above a phrase that appeared to have blood dripping off its letters. The phrase read, "Ricky's a dead man." Only a DNA test would confirm if the partial remains of the young man found in southeast Texas was Ricky Lee Jones. Unfortunately, investigators lacked a known source of Jones's DNA to perform a comparison.
And everywhere else.
Since Rhodes claimed to have been abducting and torturing his victims for the past 15 years, the team submitted their timeline to VICAP, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, an FBI database that lists thousands of solved and unsolved crimes nationwide. Despite the limited information and gaps in the timeline, Detective Jackson was not surprised when the system returned over 50 possible matches with open homicide and missing persons cases.
His trips from Houston to Baltimore to LA and back in a matter of 4 to 5 days at a time could just give you an idea of how many people he has access to and remote locations that he could abuse these people and dispose of them.
A week later, agents tracked down Rhodes's truck in Houston. 2 years had passed since Rhodes had driven the rig. The cab had since been steam cleaned, repainted, and used by other drivers. But evidence of his crimes somehow survived. Investigators recovered a single strand of head hair that was consistent with Regina's. Miraculously, they also found a small fingerprint on the vinyl upholstery in the sleeper compartment that matched her prints. That proved she had been in the truck, but it did not prove when or whether she'd been there against her will. By January of 1992, almost 2 years after Regina had disappeared, investigators determined the evidence was not decisive enough to prove interstate kidnapping. They dropped the federal case. With Rhodes's parole hearing just a week away, investigators convinced the Bond County prosecutor to press charges in Illinois for capital murder. They knew the evidence was circumstantial, but they pressed on.
I feared that he could escape, and I also believe that due to the overcrowding in the prison systems and those sort of things, that he could be released.
On February 6th, investigators traveled to the Arizona State Prison in Florence to serve the warrant to Rhodes. Their plan was to confront Rhodes with photos of Regina, hoping to prompt a confession. An incriminating statement would bolster their case. The suspected serial killer was unfazed, even smug.
We spent approximately an hour with him, but Rhodes was unwilling to speak with us and denied any involvement in the death, and was very firm in his denials. And at that point, we knew that we were going to have to prove our case.
Agents believed Rhodes knew they were fishing for a confession because their evidence was weak. They suspected this arrogant man was betting he could beat the charges. Maybe he believed that they didn't care enough about his victims to earn a conviction.
A lot of serial offenders, whether they're killers or other sexual predators, will pick victims that they consider the forgotten people. Because they're banking on that element that law enforcement and society doesn't really care about hitchhikers or less wealthy people, less established folks. He preyed on that type of person in the hopes that he wouldn't get the attention that did happen.
Almost 2 years after the death of Regina K. Walters and the kidnapping and sexual assault of at least 2 other women, Robert Ben Rhodes was extradited from Arizona to stand trial in Illinois. He and his attorney managed to delay the trial date for 6 months. On September 11th, the overconfident trucker lost his nerve. In a Bond County, Illinois courthouse, his attorney pled down the capital murder charge that carried a possible death sentence. He accepted an offer of first-degree murder with a penalty of life. Rhodes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even as he serves his time in the maximum security prison in Chester, Illinois, investigators have not abandoned the case. They continue to gather evidence, committed to proving that Regina K. Walters was not Rhodes' only murder victim.
There is one other picture of a female as yet unidentified that got into the truck with him. We're somewhat concerned whether that may be another victim. Anybody that gets into the comfort zone of the truck of a serial killer may potentially be another murder victim.
Investigators continue to work on identifying the unknown women from Rhodes's past in hopes of bringing the small comfort of closure to their grieving families. When a young woman vanished, family and friends discovered her secret life. The political appointee carried on an illicit affair with a wealthy married man. Investigators suspected that her ex-lover was responsible, but they had little physical evidence to support their theory. In order to bring him to justice, the FBI would have to go undercover and turn brother against brother.
Power is a responsibility as well as a privilege. But in the wrong hands, power can corrupt. This is especially true in the legal community. For former Deputy Attorney General for the state of Delaware, losing sight of his sworn oath to uphold justice would prove lethal. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When a prominent attorney tried to put himself above the law, it was up to the FBI to prove that justice is blind.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Thursday, June 27, 1996. At the upscale Panorama restaurant, prominent Delaware attorney Thomas Capano, separated from his wife, dined with his mistress Anne Marie Fahey, the appointment secretary to the Delaware governor.
Back next week, we'll be out and look how good we work together.
Despite the candlelight and wine, her mood was grim. Anne Marie told Capano she wanted to end their relationship. Capano was furious with her decision. After dinner, Capano drove Anne Marie to the Wilmington, Delaware house he rented since leaving his wife. He insisted she come inside to continue the conversation. He didn't want their affair to end. Two nights later, Anne Marie failed to show up for a dinner party with her sister Kathleen. Concerned, Kathleen arranged to meet the Delaware State Police at Anne Marie's flat. She explained that no one had heard from the governor's secretary since Thursday. They found unpacked perishable groceries on the kitchen counter. Kathleen called Michael Scanlon, a successful banker and Anne Marie's close friend, to see if he had seen her. He was supposed to pick her up for the dinner party, but Anne Marie never returned his calls.
This is out of character for her?
Niece has everything always put in its place. I just don't understand.
Anne Marie's family knew her to be neat and orderly, yet her apartment was in disarray. Shoes littered the bedroom floor alongside her purse. An expensive pantsuit remained in its gift box.
This isn't normal.
No, not at all.
A detective searched the purse. He found her wallet and ID, though her keys were missing. Detective Robert Donovan of the Wilmington Police was called to the scene and believed that Anne Marie hadn't left the apartment on her own.
From the information that they're providing, they said she's not the type of person to leave, go walking around the neighborhood, or to go somewhere without letting somebody know where she's at. Number one, typical with a female, when she goes somewhere, she takes her pocketbook, wallet, identification, something.
This is Detective Donovan.
In the bedroom, Kathleen found a packet of letters from a man named Thomas Capano. They professed his love for her. Kathleen and Scanlon were perplexed. Anne Marie had never even mentioned Capano. Though Anne Marie's sister had never heard of the man, Detective Donovan certainly had. Thomas Capano was a powerful man in the state of Delaware.
Tom Capano was extremely connected. He was, at one point, he was number 2 man for the city of Wilmington. He was head legal counsel for the governor for the state. He was very close with a number of state representatives, state senators. extremely close with some retired police chiefs for the city of Wilmington. Very influential.
The detective found Anne Marie's journal in the bedroom and flipped to the last page. The diary entry evidenced her relief at ending her love affair with Capano. It read, "I have finally brought closure to Tom Capano. What a controlling, insecure maniac."
Doesn't look like a happy relationship, though. Not at all.
The officers paid a visit to Thomas Capano at 3:39 a.m. Separated from his wife and the father of 4 daughters, 47-year-old Capano was living in a rented house located only minutes from Anne Marie's apartment. Capano confirmed that he had a relationship with Anne Marie, but claimed that it was long over. According to him, the couple had parted as friends. He told the detectives that he had dinner with her on Thursday night in Philadelphia. Afterwards, he brought her back to his house briefly to give her a gift and some groceries she needed. Then he took her home. When asked, Capano claimed he had not seen Anne Marie since, nor was he surprised that she was missing. Capano explained that Anne Marie had Friday off. Perhaps she had decided to go away for the weekend. He described her as moody and at times suicidal. He suggested the police wait until Monday morning when she would probably show up at work.
We then asked him if she, in fact, was at his house, and if he would have a problem with us looking through his house. He stated that he would have a problem because his children were with him for the weekend and they were upstairs asleep.
On Monday, however, Anne Marie failed to show up for work. Investigators returned to her apartment building and talked to her downstairs neighbor.
Can you tell me something about what happened last night?
The neighbor had been away over the weekend, but remembered hearing a single set of footsteps in Anne Marie's apartment on Thursday evening at around 9:45.
Normally we hear high heels.
They seemed heavier than usual, possibly a man's. She heard nothing more after that night. State and local investigators checked Anne Marie's bank and credit card accounts and found no activity after June 28th. Friends and relatives reported they had not seen or heard from her since that day.
All right, here.
Apparently, Thomas Capano was the last person to have seen Anne Marie Fahey.
Take him up to the Panorama restaurant in Philadelphia and see if you can find
Investigators traveled across the Delaware border to Pennsylvania to corroborate Capano's story. They spoke to the waitress who served the couple on June 27th at about 7 p.m. She remembered the evening and recognized Thomas Capano and Anne Marie Fahey from the photos.
Yeah, that's her. She wasn't really happy.
She wasn't.
The waitress recalled that the pair seemed tense. Anne Marie said little and hardly touched her food. After she handed the bill to Capano, he passed it to Anne Marie, who signed his name on the charge slip. The waitress never overheard any of their conversation since the couple stopped talking each time she approached the table. Investigators met with several of Anne Marie's close friends who described an illicit affair that had begun almost 3 years earlier. In 1993, 27-year-old Anne Marie Fahey met Thomas Capano in the governor's office.
No, Tom Capano.
Despite her high-profile job, she was impressed by the powerful lawyer and flattered when she caught his eye. Investigators learned that while Capano showered Anne Marie with expensive gifts, he only romanced her in out-of-the-way places to avoid being seen. She felt a strong attraction to the charismatic older man, but feared her family's disapproval and kept the affair secret.
I'll be waiting for you when you go back.
As months passed, Anne-Marie confided to her friends that Capano's charming exterior belied an angry and manipulative man. He understood love only in terms of control. She told her friends that she couldn't trust him. By the spring of 1996, his manipulation and anger had damaged their relationship beyond repair. Capano told Anne-Marie that he had separated from his wife so they could stop hiding.
I don't even want to talk to you about this. I don't even want to talk to you about this.
Give me more. You know how much I can.
Anne-Marie wanted out. Capano refused to let go. Detectives learned that shortly before Anne-Marie disappeared, she began seeing Michael Scanlon, who she found caring and stable. It was the relationship that she had always hoped for. The prospect of a marriage proposal seemed promising. Thomas Capano continued to pursue her. Anne-Marie told friends that Capano was stalking her. She was scared and wanted him out of her life. Capano refused to accept the rejection.
Well, Tom Capano had never been told no before. He thought that he could control everything in his life and everything in everybody else's life. Finally, somebody, Anne-Marie Fahey, stood up to him and told him, no, I've had enough, and Tom couldn't handle it.
The Fahey family posted a $10,000 reward for information relating to Anne-Marie's disappearance. Over the 4th of July weekend, hundreds of concerned citizens helped police conduct a massive search of the local park where Anne-Marie often jogged. The governor himself joined in the hunt.
Thank you for everybody who knows and loves Anne-Marie.
They found no trace of the missing secretary. The case became a federal investigation since Anne-Marie, a resident of Delaware, was last seen in Pennsylvania. Special Agent Eric Alpert of the FBI's Wilmington field office offered his help.
I contacted Robert Donovan, asked him if we could be of any assistance. He said we could. At that point, we pulled telephone records and credit card records.
With the help of the U.S. Attorney, Alpert secured credit card statements and phone records belonging to Thomas Capano and Anne-Marie Fahey. Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly noticed that Capano made a $308 purchase at Wallpaper Warehouse just 2 days after Fahey disappeared.
Thought that was odd because Tom Capano was living in a rental house, so I called the number for Wallpaper Warehouse. The person answered the phone and said air-based carpets. I turned to Bob Donovan right away, and we both had the same reaction, which was, my God, he must have rolled her up in a carpet.
Investigators now believe that Thomas Capano killed Anne-Marie Fahey, but they needed more than a hunch to convince a judge there was probable cause for a warrant to search Capano's house. In July of 1996, agents and local detectives focused on attorney Thomas Capano, who they suspected was responsible for the murder of his former mistress, Anne-Marie Fahey. 2 days after she vanished, Capano had purchased a new carpet. For Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly, it raised suspicions that Capano had concealed Anne-Marie's body in a rug and removed it from his house.
Up until that point, we had probable cause to believe that Tom Capano had played a role in the disappearance of Anne-Marie Fahey. But what we didn't have was probable cause that we'd find evidence in his house.
I really wanted to call you in to ask.
Hoping to establish probable cause in order to obtain a search warrant, investigators learned that Capano's housekeeper had cleaned his home 4 days before Anne-Marie's disappearance. She added that Capano canceled her service the following week, claiming that the house didn't need cleaning since his children hadn't stayed over. The detective quickly noted the inconsistency in Capano's story. On the night he was questioned in his home, the attorney claimed his children were upstairs asleep. 3 weeks later, the housekeeper returned to the residence and noticed something that struck her as odd. The love seat and carpet from the living room were gone. In their place sat 2 chairs and a brand new carpet. This simple observation gave Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly all he needed to move forward.
So when you combine the rug and the couch with Tom Capano's statement that he had brought Anne Marie to his home on the evening of June 27th, and you combine that with all the other evidence we knew about their tumultuous relationship, we now were armed with probable cause to get a search warrant for his house.
Connolly and FBI agent Eric Alpert prepared an airtight 37-page search warrant for Thomas Capano's Wilmington home, serving it on July 31st, 1996. Detective Robert Donovan didn't know what they'd find, but they knew where to look.
We searched the entire residence, but we took special attention to this room, the great room area, because we believed that Anne Marie Fahey was murdered in that room.
The team found the 2 chairs and new carpet described by the housekeeper. They moved them to see what might be hidden underneath.
Hey, careful with the furniture. Now you don't have to destroy the place.
The floor was clean. On the baseboard nearby, agents found something promising. Barely visible to the untrained eye, they saw 2 brown spots that appeared to be dried blood. Agents retrieved samples by swabbing the area with a mild saline solution. Investigators hoped the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. could provide stronger forensic evidence from the samples. For DNA lab examiner Alan Giusti, testing the recovered material presented a challenge.
The items themselves are not very large. The stains were actually fairly small, and because of that, we have to be careful because our test will consume part of a stain to determine if it's blood.
Giusti performed a Kastle-Meyer test. This test requires only a pinhead-sized specimen. He applied the chemical phenolphthalein, which turns pink when mixed with blood. The test worked. For Agent Eric Alpert and the team, the discovery was important.
This is very significant because at this point we had no murder weapon and had no other physical evidence in the case, so finding blood was very important to us. We needed to find whose blood that was and whether it matched Anne Marie Fahey's blood.
It was impossible to determine whether the blood belonged to Anne Marie without DNA samples from her or her parents. Samples from her siblings would be too disparate to provide solid results. Unfortunately, Anne Marie's parents were deceased. Anne Marie's brothers and sisters provided investigators with a possible lead. A check of the missing woman's calendar book revealed that she had given blood a month before she disappeared. Agents went to the blood bank to subpoena the sample. It was too late. Her blood had been reduced to plasma and shipped overseas. There was only a slim chance it could be retrieved. Worse yet, DNA-rich red and white blood cells had been removed, and extracting DNA from plasma alone is next to impossible. As the investigation slowly moved forward, Thomas Capano continued to live a life of ease. As the eldest of 4 brothers, he had always been his parents' favorite, and the son who had achieved success in all he sought. Thomas's brothers had always looked up to him. Jerry, the youngest, had been rescued many times by his older brother's legal expertise. Joseph ran the family construction company, while Louis managed the family's considerable real estate holdings. The Capanos were multi-millionaires and seemed impenetrable. Investigators learned early on that Thomas Capano's family and friends were unlikely to cooperate.
We spoke with an awful lot of people that are very influential that just would not believe that Tom Capano was capable of murder. And were mad at us for investigating him. We're mad that we believed he was, in fact, a murderer. That was frustrating because it was tough to get anybody that was cooperative.
The team believed that if Capano killed Anne Marie, someone close to him probably helped dispose of the body. But no one was talking. With no body, no DNA sample, no murder weapon, and no cooperation from his cohorts, the federal case against Thomas Capano was weak. On August 6th, Agent Alpert received a call from Sean Taylor, a project manager in Louis Capano's development company. Taylor knew something he believed might interest investigators. He agreed to meet agents and detectives in a secure location, fearing what would happen to him if the Capano brothers found out he was talking to authorities. He described an unusual event that occurred the day after Anne Marie was reported missing.
He advised us he was a project manager at one of the Louis Capano and Associates construction sites. He stated that he was ordered on July 1st, the Monday after Anne Marie Fahey's disappearance, to have 4 dumpsters on the property pulled and dumped. And he felt that was strange because none of them were full, and it would be very out of character to do that because of the cost of dumping something like that.
This reinforced the investigators' suspicion that Thomas Capano had help disposing of Anne Marie's body. Louis Capano's development company was served with a subpoena for the dumpster records, as investigators began to turn up the heat on the powerful Capano family.
Louis, I need to talk to you. Here, go ahead and take these. Get with Bob.
They hoped one of the brothers would turn against Thomas and tell authorities about Anne Marie's disappearance.
Your screw-ups are driving me crazy.
The solid bonds between brothers began to strain, but Thomas managed to keep everyone in line.
See you later. Bye.
Under oath, Louis denied that he had ordered the dumpsters emptied. Undaunted, investigators continued to pursue their best lead.
So we traced that dumpster. We went to the hauling company, and we found out exactly when the dumpster had been removed. We found out the dump that it had been brought to, and we went to that dump site.
In the middle of August, an evidence recovery team arrived at the Delaware landfill. Workers pointed out the area where the dumpsters had been emptied. The recovery team searched for anything that could be traced back to Thomas Capano's home.
We were looking for the carpeting, the love seat, possibly a murder weapon, and also possibly Anne Marie Fahey's body.
For 4 hot, grueling days, FBI agents scoured the landfills. They found nothing. The investigators finally walked away, tired and frustrated. Despite their strong suspicions, they didn't have enough evidence to bring charges. To agents, detectives, and prosecutors, it looked as if Thomas Capano had gotten away with the perfect murder. In August 1996, FBI agents and Delaware authorities continued to pursue evidence against Thomas Capano for the murder of his former mistress, Anne Marie Fahey. She had been missing for 8 weeks and was presumed murdered by her wealthy ex-lover. As FBI agent Eric Alpert explains, investigators had no physical evidence to support their theory.
There were several challenges in this investigation. We had no murder weapon, no true crime scene, no body, and no witnesses who would come forward and give us information as to what had happened.
On September 6th, investigators received the call they were hoping for. The blood plasma Anne Marie had donated a month before her disappearance had been recovered just before it reached its European destination.
Sure.
agents needed a known sample of Anne-Marie's DNA to compare to the unknown sample from the blood spots found in Capano's house. But DNA lab examiner Alan Giusti didn't know if the plasma would be sufficient.
The problem with extracting DNA from plasma is that plasma is the portion of blood that is separated from the blood cells, and the blood cells are what contain the DNA. So when you're working with plasma, you're actually working with a very poor source of DNA.
To his surprise, he found residual red blood cells in the plasma. This enabled Giusti to retrieve a small amount of Anne-Marie's DNA. He compared her DNA sequence to the sequence from the unknown source. They matched. There was only a minute chance that the blood spots from Capano's house did not belong to Anne-Marie Fahey. Investigators now had the first piece of physical evidence they needed to support their suspicion that Thomas Capano had committed murder. They knew they needed more. Capano's cell phone records revealed that he had called a woman named Debbie McIntyre from Stone Harbor, New Jersey on June 28th, the morning after Anne-Marie disappeared. Investigators learned that Debbie McIntyre was yet another one of Capano's mistresses.
We saw that they called each other frequently, but we weren't sure about their relationship. From doing further interviews, we found that Thomas Capano and Debbie McIntyre had been having an affair for approximately 12 years. So at the same time when he was having an affair with Anne-Marie Fahey, he was also having an affair with Debbie McIntyre.
Agents also learned that Jerry Capano, the youngest brother, had owned a boat anchored in Stone Harbor. Detective Robert Donovan investigated.
We found out that Jerry Capano had sold this boat locally. Somebody local had purchased it. We were able to track that down and spoke with a gentleman and looked at his boat.
They scoured the boat for traces of Anne-Marie, but found nothing. The new boat owner told investigators that Jerry Capano had sold the boat without anchors. They suspected that the anchors were now at the bottom of the ocean, wrapped around Anne-Marie's body. Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly and his team turned their attention to Jerry Capano.
And so beginning back in November of '96, we put in place this undercover operation with the idea that we would gather incriminating evidence of Jerry's activities and any other information we could gain about his role on June 28th in disposing of the body.
If agents gathered enough evidence to bring federal charges against Jerry, they could pressure him to talk about his brother's role in the murder. For 11 months, undercover agents tracked Jerry's every move. They learned that he frequented bars and nightclubs and used illegal drugs. They also learned that he collected firearms, a federal crime for a known drug user. On the evening of October 9th, 1997, 15 months after the disappearance of Anne-Marie Fahey, the FBI, assisted by the ATF, raided Jerry Capano's house. He was caught completely by surprise. A friend with a criminal record stood with him in the garage. If agents found illegal narcotics stored in the same house as Jerry's weapons, they'd have the physical evidence needed to leverage his cooperation. They found a small arsenal of guns stored in the bedroom closet of Jerry's 3-year-old son. Agent Alpert searched the laundry room near the kitchen. He dug through the pockets of Jerry's clothes. Jerry's collection of rifles and handguns wasn't illegal per se, unless they found illicit drugs on the premises. Agent Alpert found them. he recovered cocaine and marijuana. Now investigators had what they needed to charge Jerry Capano with felony firearms violations. They could also levy child endangerment charges. They did neither. Prosecutors would offer immunity if Jerry would testify against his brother Thomas.
We did not believe Jerry had any role in the murder of Anne Marie Fahey. We only believed he had a role in the cover-up, the disposal of evidence. And we also knew he was very loyal to his brother. He almost viewed his brother as a father figure. But at the same time, he had a wife, he had children, he had a pretty good life, a life that he probably wouldn't want to give up to go to jail. And that was the card that we had to play.
I mean, they've come through the entire house.
After the raid, the FBI allowed Jerry Capano to consider all that was at stake.
We need to talk now.
He was forced to choose between his brother and his wife and children. The pressure upon Jerry Capano was enormous. Not only was he one of Thomas Capano's closest allies, he was his brother. Investigators weren't certain if Jerry would crack. Even if he did, they had no way of knowing if he could help them bring the powerful Thomas Capano to justice. A year and a half after the disappearance of Anne Marie Fahey, Jerry Capano asked to see the FBI and U.S. Attorney Colm Conley on November 8, 1997. Federal authorities had threatened Jerry Capano with federal firearm charges if he did not cooperate with their investigation. They suspected Jerry had helped his brother Thomas Capano dispose of Anne Marie's body in the Atlantic Ocean. With legal counsel by his side, Jerry related his involvement in the incident. It began months before Anne Marie's June 28th disappearance.
With you personally.
Early in 1996, his brother Thomas came to him with a problem. Jerry told Agent Eric Alpert that he didn't realize Thomas had lied to him.
Well, in February 1996, Thomas Capano went to his brother Jerry and told him that he was being extorted, that somebody was threatening his children. He asked Jerry to get him some cash to help pay the extortionists. He also asked Jerry for a gun and said that he might need Jerry's help someday with the boat to dispose of the extortionist's body.
Jerry provided Thomas with $8,000 and the gun he asked for. Thomas returned the weapon a month later, telling Jerry the money was enough. He didn't need the gun after all. He heard little else about Thomas's problem until Friday, June 29th, 1996.
I got a call from Tom.
Early in the morning, Jerry stepped out of his house to find his older brother parked at the end of the driveway. Thomas looked upset.
6 o'clock in the morning, Tom. What are you doing here?
Jerry, I need your help. Jerry, I need you to get the boat.
I don't want any part of it.
Jerry knew, as soon as Tom asked to use the boat, that Tom had been involved in the killing of somebody. And Jerry said to Tom, "Did you do it?" And his brother said yes. And Jerry said he didn't want to have any part in getting rid of a body, and he refused to give up the boat. He said he had a wife, he had kids, he had a beautiful home. And Tom played the brother card. Tom said, "I have nobody else to turn to. You're my kid brother. Please help me."
I'll meet you at your house.
About an hour?
And finally, Jerry relented. And Jerry agreed to meet Tom and to go to Stone Harbor and to take the boat out and dispose of the body.
Behind closed doors, they met inside Thomas's garage, where he asked Jerry to help him load a heavy cooler into his truck. He never opened the cooler, but Jerry believed the body of Thomas's extortionist was stuffed inside. Only the carpet remained.
What are you going to do with this rug? This isn't good.
Jerry told his brother not to take it on the boat because it probably wouldn't sink. When they arrived at Stone Harbor, New Jersey, they carried the cooler down the dock in plain sight. It was a common cooler used by fishermen at the marina, large enough to carry an ample supply of bait. No one would think twice about two men loading the heavy container onto a boat. The brothers fueled up and headed for the open waters of the Atlantic. Thomas Capano ordered his brother to motor 60 miles offshore, where the water was deep enough to hide the body permanently. No one else would be close enough to see what the brothers were about to do. They heaved the cooler into the sea, but Thomas Capano miscalculated. The makeshift coffin floated. Thomas then ordered Jerry to sink the cooler by firing slugs into it. The cooler still floated. The millionaire lawyer retrieved it and decided to sink the corpse without the cooler. His younger brother wanted no part of it. He moved to the front of the boat while Thomas wrapped the boat's anchors around the body. What Jerry Capano saw next was critical for Detective Robert Donovan.
Jerry turns around when he asks Tom, "Are you done? Are you done?" Tom tells him, "Yeah, I'm done." As Jerry turns around to look at Tom, he sees a calf and a foot sinking down.
On their way back to Stone Harbor, Thomas Capano disassembled the cooler and scattered its parts into the ocean.
And Tom said he needed me to come back to the house, that he had something else that I needed to do with him.
The work wasn't finished.
Wrapped it in anchor chains and threw it over.
His brother needed to dispose of more evidence.
Tom says, "I need your help getting rid of this couch." And Jerry sees a stain on the couch, which would be right about shoulder height, which is a large, he described as a basketball size blood stain.
Well, then do something. Then do something about it if it bothers you.
Investigators believe the stain was caused by a fatal gunshot to Anne Marie's head. They dumped the couch and the carpet into a trash bin at a construction site managed by their brother Louis. Jerry had nothing more to add. When word got out that Jerry had cooperated with investigators, his brother Louis appeared with his lawyer 2 days later.
Conversations for an official record.
Louis Capano recanted his earlier statement and admitted that he had obeyed Thomas's orders to empty the dumpsters earlier than scheduled. The FBI began 24-hour surveillance on Thomas Capano. They believed the suspected murderer might try to kill his brothers to keep them from testifying. Less than a week later, on November 12, 1997, the surveillance team watched Capano and his brother Joseph loading suitcases into their truck. They were heading towards the airport. Agent Alpert feared Thomas was fleeing jurisdiction.
At that point, I paged Colin Conley, the Assistant United States Attorney who was inside the grand jury room, with a 911 page to come out. I told him of the details and said we need to make a decision on what we're going to do.
Investigators felt they still didn't have enough to charge Thomas Capano with kidnapping and murder. but agreed they had to stop him from fleeing. Alpert ordered his arrest on grounds that Capano had obstructed justice by coercing his brothers to give false testimony. 17 months after her disappearance, the suspected killer of Anne Marie Fahey was finally in custody. Two brothers now stood against one. But investigators still had no body and no murder weapon. On November 12, 1997, the FBI arrested prominent Delaware lawyer Thomas Capano. He was the prime suspect for the murder of Anne Marie Fahey. His younger brother Jerry claimed Thomas had dumped a corpse into the Atlantic Ocean. Jerry pointed investigators to the area off the New Jersey shore, but they never found Anne Marie's body. Assistant U.S. Attorney Colm Connolly had a daunting task ahead of him.
We didn't have a body, and that's always a problem. There have only been a handful of prosecutions in the country that have been successfully done without a body. And in Delaware, prior to this case, there had only been one case prosecuted without a body, and it had resulted in an acquittal.
The only physical evidence they had against Thomas Capano were 2 specks of Fahey's blood found in his living room. While investigators prepared the difficult prosecution, Special Agent Eric Alpert learned something that could strengthen their case.
We received a phone call from an individual who said that he had found the cooler floating in the ocean around the weekend of July 4th, 1996. And I asked him to further describe the cooler, and he said that the cooler was missing a lid and had a bullet hole in it.
The lead sounded promising.
I'll have somebody there.
The caller read an article about Capano's arrest that reported a cooler was used in the crime. But the story never mentioned that the lid was missing or that a slug had pierced it. Alpert immediately drove the 2 hours to Bay City, New Jersey to check the lead. On the weekend of July 4th, 1996, Ken Chubb was fishing 6 miles off Indian River when he came across a cooler bobbing in the ocean.
It had 2 bullet holes and blood stain, but you know, we were amazed that this was a brand new cooler, but we weren't amazed at the bullet holes or the blood because they shoot shark a lot, and there might have been a shark flopping around in there and they shot it, and that's where the blood came from.
Yes, sir. It certainly is. In fact, it's cool.
Chubb patched the holes, replaced the lid, and used it as his own until the Capano arrest story broke. Agents discovered the barcode on the cooler matched the one Capano purchased with his credit card on April 22nd, 2 months before Anne Marie disappeared.
The cooler was important in this case because it prevented Tom Capano's defense team pretty much from saying that Jerry Capano was lying. It corroborated exactly what Jerry Capano had told us well before he knew we would ever find this cooler.
The cooler was their second piece of physical evidence, and its purchase demonstrated Capano's premeditation. Investigators still had no murder weapon. They searched records at local gun stores for purchases by Capano or by others close to him. They hit pay dirt. Investigators discovered that Capano's mistress, Debbie McIntyre, had purchased a .22 caliber Beretta on May 13th, 1996, 6 weeks before Fahey disappeared. They brought McIntyre in for questioning. She pretended that her relationship with Thomas Capano was more casual than it actually was.
She spent years in jail.
Connolly asked if Capano owned a gun. McIntyre denied it.
No. I asked her, "Do you own a gun?" And immediately her demeanor changed. She started blushing. She got very nervous. It was clear that she was lying, and she told us this just fantastical story about buying a gun and then throwing it in the garbage can. And we asked her, did anybody know she had bought that gun? And she said, one person, and it was Tom Capano.
Connolly pointed out that if McIntyre supplied the gun to Capano, she had committed a felony. Under the advice of her attorney, McIntyre admitted that Capano had asked her to buy the gun in the first place. The trial began on October 26, 1998. Early on in the proceedings, Capano surprised the prosecution by admitting that he had disposed of Fahey's body as Jerry had testified. He also admitted to asking his brother Louis to empty the dumpsters early. On the witness stand, Capano painted his own version of events on the evening of June 27, 1996. After dinner, he and Anne-Marie came back to his place. According to Capano, they had resolved their differences. They were enjoying each other's company when Debbie McIntyre burst into his house.
What are you doing? Who is this?
What
In here with
are
this
you
woman.
doing in my house?
I am gonna.
Angry and despondent, McIntyre threatened suicide. Anne-Marie was killed instantly. Despite his legal training, Capano claimed he didn't call police because he was trying to protect McIntyre and himself. Instead, he retrieved the cooler that he said was to be a gift to his brother.
See if I can refresh your memory.
He decided to use it as a coffin.
This is the official document.
During cross-examination, Connolly ponded out that Capano had prosecuted a similar case in 1976 when he served as Assistant Attorney General for Delaware. In that case, the killer dumped his victim into a creek near Delaware City. At the time, Capano was quoted as saying the killer would have gotten away with his crime if he would have dumped the body into the Atlantic. Capano denied this.
Well, it's all here. Can I submit this, Your Honor?
In the state's version of events, Capano forced Anne-Marie Fahey to return to his house. She was determined to end their affair. Capano would not be jilted. He took out the Beretta that McIntyre bought for him and shot Fahey in cold blood. Then he stuffed her into the cooler. At about 9:45 that same evening, he entered Anne-Marie's apartment with fresh groceries and the new pantsuit she would never wear. He carefully tried to cover his tracks as he had planned for months. On January 17, 1999, the jury returned with a verdict.
Mr. Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor, we have.
Please rise.
Based on his brother's testimony, the blood evidence, and the recovered cooler, the once prominent lawyer and millionaire Thomas Capano was found guilty of first-degree murder.
We were able to reaffirm a lot of people's faith in the judicial system here. The system works. I think we accomplished justice here. I have a very good relationship with the Fahey family, and so I think we've not only been able to bring about justice, but we've brought as much comfort as they can have given the tragedy they had to suffer.
The jury went further, sentencing Capano to the gas chamber. It was the first time in Delaware history that a defendant had been found guilty in a capital crime without a body or a murder weapon. Capano now waits on death row pending appeals. As crack cocaine tore through Washington, D.C., a drug gang fought to take control.
What up? Huh? Papers at?
Authorities fought back with everything they had. But gang members used any means to avoid prosecution. The as the violence raged out of control, law enforcement would take back the streets.
In the early 1990s, Washington, D.C. became the murder capital of the nation. Few were left untouched by gang violence, which was ignited by the drug trade. By 1994, that violence would strike at the very heart of law enforcement. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office, who would fall to the FBI to lead an international manhunt and bring in the leader of the city's most vicious gang.
October 26, 1994. The nation's capital was about to become the backdrop to another bloody crime. Just before midnight, 3 masked gunmen broke into a home in the northwest section of the city.
Get up! Get up! Get up! Now! Get up!
They targeted Gerald Gaither, demanding his cash and drugs.
Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's it at? Where's the money?
He turned over what little money he had in his pockets.
Get up!
The owner of the home, William Ragland, was accosted while working in his basement.
Where's the money at? Get out here.
Upstairs, one of the gunmen discovered Nancy Hatchett and Darlene Hatchett, Ragland's daughter and granddaughter.
Get out there. Into the room. Go!
To convince Gaither to cooperate, the gunmen terrorized each of the residents.
Get out! Get out!
The women were ordered to lie face down on the floor.
Get out! Hands out! Tell us, come on, old man. Come on, old man. Tell us where the money is. Where is it? Where is it? No.
Gaither denied having more cash or drugs.
Put your hands down now.
One of the gunmen turned his .22 caliber handgun towards Ragland. The 89-year-old retired federal worker died instantly.
Tell us where it is. Play games.
Andre Madison, another resident, was hustled into the living room.
Shut up.
One of the 3 attackers noticed his gold necklace and ripped it from his neck.
Get down. Get out. Get out. Face down. Face down. Where's the money? Shut up. Shut up.
Though one man was dead, Gaither still refused to cooperate.
Get out. Get out. What are you doing?
Enraged, one of the gunmen began shooting the residents. The robbery attempt collapsed into murder. The trio quickly fled the house. One of the attackers vomited near the back door. Nancy Hatchett called 911. Officers from D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department quickly arrived at the house, located in a known drug area. Inside, 3 people were dead. William Ragland, his granddaughter Darlene Hatchett, and Gerald Gaither. Pictures were taken of each body, and shell casings were collected. Outside, police discovered vomit near the door.
Hey, how you doing?
Nancy Hatchett and Andre Madison, the only survivors, tried to help police develop suspects. But the attackers were masked, making identification difficult.
Okay.
For Metropolitan Homicide Detective Anthony Brigadini, a check on victim Gerald Gaither suggested a possible motive.
The main victim of the triple was a drug dealer in the First and Kennedy Street area. The guy drove flashy cars, had nice clothes, had a lot of money. when the drug dealer was unable to give them enough money and or drugs, things started to get a little harried, and that's when the shootings occurred inside.
Neighbors told police that after hearing gunshots, they saw a dark-colored sedan with a loud muffler leaving the area. An all-points bulletin was issued for the vehicle and 3 men inside. One hour after the murders, 2 D.C. cops spotted a noisy vehicle that fit the report. Noticing 3 men inside the vehicle, the officers pulled over the gray Oldsmobile. The police asked the men for identification. The driver was identified as Benny Lee Lawson. The passengers were determined to be Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves. In one of their pants pockets, police recovered a broken gold necklace. But details from the murder scene were still incomplete. To the officers, the necklace was meaningless. After recording all of the men's names and addresses, the 3 were soon released. There was no evidence in the car to connect them to the murders. Despite the lack of solid suspects, homicide detectives believed that Gerald Gaither had been murdered by a rival drug gang. By 1990, crack cocaine had hit the streets in Washington, D.C. Neighborhood gangs began to emerge throughout the city when it became clear that there was a lot of money to be made from dealing the drug. As more and more money flowed to the gangs, they resorted to violence to protect their turf from rival drug dealers. By 1994, the nation's capital was averaging nearly 400 homicides a year. D.C. police joined forces with the FBI and several federal agencies to combat the drug-related violence. Most of the murders remained unsolved. Hoping to rattle free a lead in the triple murder, detectives began canvassing the neighborhood where the murders took place. Neighbors were too afraid to openly cooperate. Some were willing to phone in information anonymously. One tip led to Benny Lee Lawson, one of the 3 men pulled over the night of the homicides. Investigators learned that the gold necklace taken from Andre Madison matched the one officers found on one of the men in Lawson's car. Detective Brigadini questioned Lawson.
Lawson's interview lasted about 3 or 4 hours, and different detectives went in and spent some time with Lawson in an attempt to get him to provide some sort of information about his involvement in the triple murder.
Sit down. Look at me.
Lawson repeatedly denied having any knowledge of the triple murder and refused to take a polygraph test. Investigators tried to shake his story with the false threat that they could put him at the murder scene through a DNA test of the recovered vomit. Lawson remained unswayed. After 4 hours, police had no choice but to release him. Lawson's name was run through the crime database. He had been identified by police intelligence units as a member of one of D.C.'s most violent and feared street gangs. The First and Kennedy Street Crew, named after the city blocks the group lived on and controlled. Organized in 1988, the crew was involved in drug dealing, theft, kidnappings, drive-by shootings, and murder. The men with Benny Lawson the night of the murders, Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves, confronted him about the long hours he spent with the homicide detectives. They believed he had snitched and told the police about the gang's involvement in the triple murder. Lawson was infuriated by the accusation. He hated the police. He assured the two that he had revealed nothing to investigators.
No, the only thing that they told me, they got my...
Since no arrests had been made, Graves was confident the cops had no evidence.
Hey, yo, hold up. They won't tell us nothing. We had to get our money.
Moa was not as sure. He declared that he would leave the country rather than be indicted for murder. Lawson vowed he would never go back to prison where he once had been raped.
What they asking?
Lawson returned home that night. Being labeled a snitch was an insult to his loyalty towards the crew. And for a gang member on the streets, it was a death sentence. He was committed to gaining back the respect of the crew, proving that he was not a snitch. On November 22nd, 1994, a few days before Thanksgiving, Benny Lawson returned to Metropolitan Police Department headquarters. It was around 3:15 p.m. He was trying to locate the homicide department he had visited several days earlier.
Hey.
He asked two teenagers for directions.
Him going that way, through that door right there.
They mistakenly led him to the cold case squad.
Okay, well, we'll see you
The
then.
team inside the office was made up of personnel from the MPD and the FBI, whose job was to breathe life into the growing number of unsolved homicide investigations. Inside the office were FBI agents Martha Dixon Martinez, John Kufta, Mike Miller, and Metropolitan Police Sergeant Hank Daly.
At least I'm consistent.
The teenagers, who were there for a scheduled appointment, began to speak with the officers. With no warning, Lawson pulled out his M11 assault handgun and started firing. The headquarters of the Washington, D.C. police was under attack. Repeated gunfire echoed through Washington, D.C. police headquarters. Detectives raced to the third-floor office where the shooting continued. No one knew what was going on behind the locked doors of the cold case squad room.
Come on, open up the door! Open up the door!
Across town at the FBI's Washington field office,
Hey, Tony, what do you have? All right, I'll talk to you later.
It was just a normal day like any other day, and we were monitoring one of the police radios, and we heard a call go out that there had been a shooting at MPD headquarters.
Okay, we're on
agents
our way.
quickly determined the shooting was taking place inside the cold case office, where several FBI agents were on duty.
And very quickly we started to page our agents that were assigned to the cold case homicide squad to try to account for all of them. And as time progressed, we weren't hearing back from some of the agents, and we realized that we might have some agents inside there. And as we listened, the calls became more serious and they were requesting assistance.
Critically wounded, Special Agent John Kufta was trapped inside the cold case squad office. When the shooting had stopped, he could hear the shouts from officers outside the office trying to get in. Help was just a few feet away.
At that point, I heard a voice tell me they couldn't get in, and I thought to myself, you know, I'm not going to die in here. I thought of, you know, my wife, my 8-month-old daughter at the time, and I knew that if I stayed awake, if I continued to breathe, if I continued to pray, and if they got me to a hospital, I'd be alive.
Shot in the thigh, arm, stomach, neck, and chest, Kufta managed to open the door. Detectives pulled him out. The only other visible person to the rescuers was Metropolitan Police Sergeant Hank Daly. Barely clinging to life, he was dragged from the room. He was rushed outside where a helicopter waited to transport him to the hospital. Not knowing if the shooter was planning another ambush, the officers waited for the SWAT team to arrive. FBI agents and SWAT teams from around the Capitol converged on the Metropolitan Police headquarters. Yells continued from inside the room as the SWAT team arrived. Heavily armed, they entered the room. They first discovered FBI agent Mike Miller's body. His weapon was still in its holster. In an adjoining room, the SWAT team discovered the body of an unidentified black male. There was a gunshot wound on his hip and a fatal wound to his head. FBI agent Martha Dixon Martinez was the final victim found. She had gunshot wounds in her back. Near her lay the gun the shooter had likely used to kill her and the others, an M11 assault weapon. Shouts for help came from inside a closet.
Suspect in the closet, open the door slowly!
Not knowing if he was a suspect or an innocent bystander, the SWAT team apprehended one of the teens who had walked in the room before the shooting began. The other teenager had managed to flee the office earlier after being shot in the leg.
I don't even know the guy.
Supervisory Special Agent Mark Giuliano and other agents arrived at the scene.
I just remember walking through the hallway and just seeing the chaotic scene and the blood and just the total realm of emotions on everybody's face, from being focused on the mission of trying to figure out what happened and could there be other people involved.
Based on the crime scene analysis, investigators quickly reconstructed what had happened inside the room.
Getting all those shells over there?
Yes.
After Miller, Kufta, and Daly were ambushed, Agent Dixon Martinez joined the firefight. She was able to shoot the suspect in the hip before being shot in the arm, dropping her gun. The attacker took her 9mm handgun and shot the agent in the back as she tried to crawl for cover. He then put the gun to his own head and pulled the trigger. Police fingerprinted the shooter. Hopefully his identity would shed light on his actions. 2 FBI agents were dead. Sergeant Hank Daly would not survive his injuries. It would be the first time in 8 years that more than one FBI agent had been killed at a single time. It was also one of the worst attacks in history on the DC police. Agent Kufta would endure 7 major medical operations before recovering. The loss of his co-workers, Sergeant Hank Daly, Agents Mike Miller and Martha Dixon Martinez, was devastating.
Martha, Mike, and Hank were law enforcement heroes. They didn't as much lose their lives as gave their lives for a cause of justice, for a cause that they so deeply believed.
Within hours, the investigation was moving forward. The fingerprints of the shooter had come back.
When the information came up about the identity of the shooter, a detective had the information, came into a conference area where the majority of the homicide officials and detectives were, and it was announced that the shooter was Benny Lee Lawson Jr.
When homicide detective Anthony Brigadini heard the news, he realized his squad was the probable target of Lawson's rampage. Lawson and the 1st and Kennedy Street crew were the prime suspects in the triple murder of William Ragland, Darlene Hatchett, and Gerald Gaither. The shootings at headquarters showed just how far the gangs would go to protect themselves.
I think that law enforcement as a whole has learned that people operating gangs or crews are serious about what it is that they're doing. They won't stop at any cost to get their mission accomplished.
Now that federal officers had been murdered, the FBI was given jurisdiction in the investigation of the crew.
I was detailed to work jointly with the FBI to investigate the First and Kennedy Street crew, who at that time we felt were responsible for essentially Lawson's actions here at police headquarters.
After joining the task force, Brigadini shared what he knew about Benny Lawson and the crew. Special Agent John Kerr was on the team. For him, Benny Lawson's connection with the First and Kennedy Street crew raised serious questions.
Was this just a random act by Benny Lee Lawson, or were there accomplices? Did he have any help in this? Were there be any further attacks on agents and police? And so that was a reason that we opened up an investigation to answer those questions. Was this a conspiracy?
Investigators obtained a search warrant that night for the house Lawson had lived in.
Please get out! Please get out!
In his room, they uncovered a note written to the members of the DC homicide unit who had interrogated him, threatening to kill them.
All right, there.
Gang-related materials, violent rap lyrics, and drawings of murders were everywhere. For investigators, the items in Lawson's room reflected a fixation with violence common to virtually all gang members.
It was very obvious and disturbing that these individuals were living this lifestyle. This is the lifestyle that they were a part of. This is the lifestyle that they identified with, and they wanted to actually live the same lifestyle as the lyrics that they were writing, the pictures they were drawing, and the videos that they had.
As the victims of the shootings were laid to rest, investigators were planning their strategy to ensure that these gang members could never kill again. With 6 homicides on their hands, including 2 FBI agents and a Washington, D.C. police detective, a joint FBI MPD task force began gathering information on the First and Kennedy Street crew. FBI agent Mark Giuliano headed up the task force.
And our goal was to A, investigate the crew because they were a violent street gang, and B, to try to determine what the motivation was of Benny Lee Lawson to come into police headquarters and do what he did, and to determine if there was anybody else involved at either end, either in helping him get there to pull off what he did or helping the crew afterwards to cover up what had happened.
In the wake of the shootings at MPD headquarters, police pressure on gang members increased. The crew members reacted by spending less time on the streets. Building a case against them for their criminal activity would be difficult. The crew was impenetrable to outsiders. Planting an undercover agent inside the gang was too dangerous.
What we realized is that A, we had a very close crew. That is, they took care of each other and watched each other very closely, but they were very, very leery of outsiders. They had been leery before, but they were even more leery now, and that any attempts for us to get somebody, an agent or a police officer on the inside, was not something that we were going to even attempt to do.
Instead, agents would have to gather intelligence on the crew through covert surveillance. As time went on, the gang returned to business as usual. The FBI was watching.
We had extensive surveillance coverage of the area, day and night, identifying everyone that came onto the block, identifying who the buyers were, what time of day, where did they go when they bought, did they get into a car, did they go into an alleyway, did they do it hand to hand right there in front of you. All these things we started to take notice of and document.
Through surveillance, the leaders of the crew were soon identified. Kobe Mowat and his second-in-command, Jermaine Graves, the two men in the car with Benny Lawson the night of the first triple homicide. On the streets, Mowat was known to be violent and unpredictable.
The reputation of Kobe Mowat was that of fear, that he would react quickly. At times he had a temper. He always carried a gun and could be extremely violent at times.
Looking into Kobe's past, investigators discovered he shared a common history with Graves and with Benny Lawson. Their relationship developed in 1990 while serving together in Washington, D.C.'s Lorton Prison, located in Northern Virginia. They had been arrested and convicted for weapons violations while preparing for a drive-by shooting in another gang.
Do you know what happened to me?
The task force members were convinced that Mowat and Graves played some role in all 6 murders. But the leaders of the 1st and Kennedy Street crew continued to keep a low profile. Agents devised a long-term strategy that would net not only Mowat and Graves, but also the entire gang membership. They would slowly build a conspiracy case against the crew that would include the entire range of their criminal activities, from crack cocaine trafficking to murder.
Off the street while back in. We're 30. Hang on to those for me.
Agents would work themselves inside by first targeting individuals who regularly purchased their drugs from the crew. This would allow them to watch and record the gang committing crimes. And by arresting the buyers, agents would have leverage to turn them into informants.
We'd come into an area when we thought that they'd be the most active in selling drugs. And in order to identify someone and hopefully get lucky, catch someone with some drugs, and maybe force them to work for us at some point.
Some of the buyers arrested were unwilling to cooperate at first. The dangerous reputations of Mowat and Graves were well known. But the threat of long prison sentences was powerful. The FBI strategy paid off. Threatened with significant jail time, one of the biggest drug suppliers to the crew decided to become an informant. At the FBI's direction, he would generate conversation with crew members about their illegal activities.
And he'd have conversations with them, and they like to brag about what they've done. And at our direction, he would bring something up, say an old drive-by shooting or an old murder, or something about drug dealing. And these individuals would just start to talk about it. They'd talk about who was involved, what happened. All of this was being recorded.
Through the informant and the recordings, agents learned that Mowat, Graves, and Lawson had killed previously. Less than 3 weeks before breaking into William Ragland's house, they had kidnapped and murdered another rival drug dealer.
What up, boy? What up? Huh?
William Red Billy Woods was a well-known dealer from a rival gang. Jermaine Graves arranged to lure Woods to his mother's house. Once there, Mowat, Graves, and Lawson robbed him and beat him. Fearing the rival gang would retaliate against the crew, they shot him 3 times and dumped his body in the road. Agents also heard testimony from another informant that further implicated Mowat, Graves, and Lawson in the triple murder at William Ragland's house.
Down where? 1st and Kennedy? Huh?
He overheard Benny, Kobe, and Jermaine Graves talking about the triple homicide. And one of the things that he mentioned that they were giving Benny a hard time for was the fact that he threw up at the scene of the triple homicide. That's something that only the homicide detectives knew and that we knew and had not been released to the public.
The information was only circumstantial, but months of surveillance and informant testimony gave agents enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for the homes of Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves. They would strike at Jermaine Graves first. A heavily armed SWAT team made their way inside his house.
Police, get down!
No one was there.
Oh, one more.
Agents would not leave empty-handed.
We were able to locate a 9mm gun, semi-automatic pistol, as well as some crack cocaine, what we believe to be crack cocaine. One of the members on the squad took the information that we got from the gun and put together an affidavit for an arrest warrant based on the fact that it was a convicted felon in possession of a firearm.
For several weeks, Graves eluded investigators. They continued surveillance, hoping that he would turn up.
We really didn't know where he was. We had some ideas. We knew he was still in the metro area, but obviously he knew once we hit his house that we were looking for him, and word was out on the street that we were looking for him, so he was keeping a very low profile. During one of our very standard surveillances, I saw an individual who walked like Jermaine Graves, just from the back. I couldn't see his face. So I asked one of the units to drive around the block and just take a look at the guy. And the next thing I know, they jumped out and arrested him. They knew as soon as they pulled around the corner it was him. And you know, he was arrested right on the street corner of First and Kennedy.
Just a few months after the first triple murder, Graves was off the streets. Making a case against Kobe Mowat would prove more difficult. With the arrest of gang member Jermaine Graves on a weapons charge, the FBI task force was one step closer to taking the First and Kennedy crew off of the Washington, D.C. streets. Now agents were ready to serve a search warrant on the home of the crew's leader, Kobe Mowat. A SWAT team entered the house Kobe shared with his twin brother Kareem. The two never knew what hit them. Investigators found gang-related documents, drawings, and writings, and a small amount of marijuana. They found no guns or evidence of the murders. But that was not their prime interest. The task force hunted for evidence of a larger crime pattern.
Gang videos, bad videos everywhere.
Most of the evidence we were looking for at the time was list of crew members, shirts that they all wore with the logo on them, pictures, phone books, things that would associate this group together.
The twins were arrested on drug charges and taken in for booking. Kobe's time in jail was brief. Only his brother Kareem's fingerprints were on the bag of pot. Kobe was released and the possession charge was dropped. Agents were determined to see him back behind bars.
You know what?
Investigators continued developing informants from within the gang.
I know you're supplying these guys with drugs, with guns.
They got the break they were looking for. Facing jail time on a drug charge, a member of the First and Kennedy crew agreed to cooperate. Finally, investigators learned the answer to the question that had most plagued them. Why did Benny Lee Lawson go into police headquarters and kill 2 FBI agents and an MPD sergeant?
Yeah, Jimmy.
It started the night Kobe Mowat, Jermaine Graves, and Benny Lee Lawson broke into the home of William Ragland. The trio's plan had been to rob drug dealer Gerald Gaither. Jermaine Graves became frustrated by Gaither's refusal to cooperate, and he snapped, killing 3 of the residents. Overwhelmed, Benny Lawson vomited outside the home. To Mowat, it was a sign of weakness.
Jimmy, man, what's going on?
The informant continued. When Lawson was brought in for questioning by investigators, Mowat was sure Lawson had snitched. He began to tell others in the crew that Lawson was cooperating.
He was sitting around, we was at the barbershop.
Benny hated snitches. He hated them. He actually pistol whipped one individual whom he thought was snitching, and probably hated him more than any other crew member. So to have Kobe think that he was ratting or snitching on him, and to go out to First and Kennedy Street crew and have the rest of the crew look at him as a snitch, we believe was more than he could handle.
Really?
For agents and investigators, it was now clear that Kobe Mowat, Jermaine Graves, and Benny Lawson had committed the triple homicide. Agents took their case to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Through these conversations and the cooperating witnesses, plus the information that the police had from the car stop the night of the triple murder, left us no doubt that they had enough to get a murder warrant for these guys for the triple murder.
It was also clear that Kobe Mowat was part of the reason Benny Lee Lawson murdered 3 investigators inside the Metropolitan Police Department. Agents finally felt ready to go before a grand jury and present their conspiracy case against Kobe Mowat and the entire crew. Among the 57 charges that were handed down were indictments for nearly a dozen homicides, drug trafficking, armed robbery, kidnapping, and racketeering. Already in custody, Graves was charged with 3 counts of felony murder. An arrest warrant was issued for Kobe Mowat. Investigators returned to his house. This time, he wasn't home. The closets had been emptied. The place looked like it had been abandoned. In the trash, investigators found a receipt for a plane ticket. It appeared that Kobe had kept his promise to flee rather than go to jail.
And the plane ticket was for just a few days before we hit the place. And the plane ticket was from New York to Moscow. And at that point, we knew that Kobe had most likely fled not only the area, but most likely the country.
Mowat was one step ahead of the agents. They tried to pick up his trail in Russia, but he was nowhere to be found. Investigators discovered there was a flight departing to Africa soon after he landed in Moscow. A check of the passenger list revealed nothing.
There you are, sir.
Agents grew increasingly more frustrated. Mowat was slipping away. For 6 months, FBI agents and Washington, D.C. police tried to track fugitive Kobe Mowat. He could be hiding anywhere. An international manhunt was underway.
We literally went months without a break. We went through hundreds and hundreds of documents that we had obtained during search warrants, during various parts of the investigation, looking for overseas phone numbers, looking for overseas relatives, once again, without a break.
After several months, Agent John Kerr got a break. Through an informant, he uncovered the name of an ex-girlfriend of Kobe's.
We had come up with addresses for one of the addresses we came up with. We subpoenaed the toll records, and sure enough, we found a collect call from Kenya on one of her toll records. And this was shortly after he would have arrived in Africa.
Agents brought her in for questioning. She repeatedly denied knowing anything about Kobe Mowat's whereabouts.
He's out killing people.
Agents confronted her about the phone records. If she continued to withhold information, they would serve her with a grand jury subpoena. She decided to cooperate. She told investigators that Kobe had in fact called her several times from Nairobi, Kenya. He had not called her recently. She believed he might have moved on to Tanzania. The information was immediately passed on overseas.
You have to know where he is.
Moat's phone call to his ex-girlfriend had originated from a hotel in Nairobi. A U.S. Department of State regional security officer in Kenya followed the lead.
We know he stayed in your hotel.
The hotel owner said he had no recollection of Kobe Moat. Agent Giuliano received the news.
And it becomes very, very frustrating because, once again, we're getting no new information. We're not getting a break. And we know that the only tie that we have now is this hotel in Nairobi, Kenya. So we go back to the regional security officers and ask them to go back out and re-interview the individual.
Again, the hotel owner insisted he knew nothing about Kobe Moat. When shown photographs, he seemed to hesitate. The regional security officer kept pressing. Finally, the owner asked for a guarantee that if he gave information, Kobe would never be told. The regional security officer agreed to protect him. He said Kobe had in fact been to his hotel, but he had left several months ago. He gave the security officer a number that Kobe had called while at the hotel. The call was to the East African country of Tanzania. It took agents a few days to determine why the hotel owner protected the First and Kennedy Street crew leader.
What we determined is that Kobe's mother was educated in Jamaica, and during that process she had befriended several individuals who ended up going to various parts of the world. She had an association with this hotel owner in Nairobi, and she had made the contact to protect Kobe and to help him.
You have a nice day.
Thank you.
The phone number in Tanzania eventually led investigators to a local college professor. He was a friend of Kobe Moat's mother. The FBI asked the Tanzanian National Police Department to follow the lead. The professor was unwilling to cooperate with the authorities.
Certainly not a student.
The National Police began their own investigation into Kobe Moat's whereabouts in their country. As the search for the gang leader intensified in Tanzania, agents and police in Washington, D.C. continued to build their case against the First and Kennedy crew. They amassed volumes of evidence through surveillance and informant testimony over the previous year.
There were about 20 to 25 Metropolitan Police Department officers and FBI special agents working on this investigation around the clock, whether it was determining phone records or uncovering new murders that these guys had committed over the years.
On September 14th, 1995, officers and agents executed over a dozen arrest warrants. They searched for any indication of the gang leader's whereabouts in Africa. They found nothing. They collected additional evidence of a criminal enterprise. They confiscated financial records, guns, drugs, and gang paraphernalia.
Stay right there. Don't move.
Some of those arrested agreed to cooperate in exchange for less jail time. Investigators were slowly taking all of the gang members off the streets. In Tanzania, the search for Kobe Moat was heating up. The National Police Force developed their own informants and learned that Moat had in fact been in contact with the university professor.
I don't know anything about Kobe. Perhaps I could take you on a small...
They returned to interview him. He once more denied knowing anything about Kobe. Threatening the Jamaican-born professor with deportation, the Tanzanian police convinced him to reconsider. Finally, he admitted to helping Moat find a place to hide out. He offered to take the authorities there.
And this hut is literally out in the middle of the tribespeople who are living in straw huts or actually just living on the ground, right amongst the wild animals and amongst where they grow their crops.
It was the last place on earth authorities would have thought to look for Mowat. Unaware that the professor had betrayed his location, Mowat was surprised to see the police approaching his hut. He set fire to anything that could potentially identify him. But the police quickly moved in and doused the flames.
What did I do?
While they searched for a reason to place him in custody, they never told Mowat why they were there.
They also determined that out in the back, he's growing a small amount of marijuana, or what they call bangi. And in that part of the country, it's against the law. And the penalty is 10 years in prison or $100. So they brought him in based on that premise, telling him that he was going to be incarcerated for that.
Investigators in Washington received the news that Mowat was in custody, but time was working against them. The Tanzanian police could only hold Kobe on the possession charge for a short period. As a drug trafficker, Mowat had plenty of cash on hand to pay the $100 fine. After days of diplomatic wrangling, the arrangements for Mowat's extradition to the United States were finalized. Agent Giuliano and Detective Brigadini traveled to Tanzania to take him into custody. Investigators were finally face to face with the man who had eluded them for over a year.
When he came in, Kobe looked tired, and he looked like he had been defeated. We explained to him what the charges were, that he was being removed to the United States, that he had been indicted in the United States for a variety of charges, including several counts of first-degree murder and racketeering.
Mowat was on his way back to the United States, where he and fellow gang members faced 57 indictments. Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves would be convicted on all counts. They were each sentenced to 35 years in a federal prison. Mowat's capture in Africa allowed investigators to get the remaining First and Kennedy crew members off the streets.
When we brought Kobe back to the United States, he just had a domino effect on the rest of the crew members. Eventually, every crew member pled guilty because they felt and actually told us that once they saw that we had found Kobe in East Africa and brought him back, that they felt they didn't stand a chance.
FBI agents and DC police worked tirelessly to bring justice to the victims of gang violence. But this case was also personal. Only after the entire gang was in jail could they have a sense of closure and feel they had vindicated the deaths of their friends, Sergeant Hank Daly and FBI agents Mike Miller and Martha Dixon Martinez. For Agent John Kufta, who barely survived the attack at police headquarters, the implications of this case were far-reaching.
When this group was locked up, I think it sent a clear message to other criminal organizations out there operating in the District of Columbia and in that tri-state area there, that the FBI and the DC police will go to whatever lengths are necessary if it takes them to other continents to track you down and find you and bring you back to the United States to justice.